My name is Shannon Wilson. I'm from Indianapolis, Indiana, and I'm a victim of family court corruption. I was abused for several years by my son's father, and I was hoping that he would get help for his hostility and his abusive nature, and then he started physically abusing me. And this affected my son greatly. My son would wake up, my young son would wake up. He's 4 years old. He'd wake up in the middle of the night and screaming and he'd wake up and say, "I'll save you, Mommy, I'll save you." And that's when I decided I've got to do something. And after one night, my ex-husband had bounced me off the wall after my son had been screaming all night, having nightmares. He started bouncing me off the wall, and my son watched. And he hurt me pretty bad. I had to go to the hospital. And my son was busy telling the people in the emergency room, "My daddy hurt my mommy. My mommy got hurt by daddy." And they wanted to call the police, and that was the biggest mistake I did by saying, "No, I don't want to cause any problems." And I went home, and a couple of nights later I was listening on the radio, this talk show about all the recent women that had been murdered by their husbands, and somebody on the program posed the question, why don't they get out? When is it too late? And I thought, my ex had 30 guns, and I hardly slept at all. I worried about him shooting me. He'd never abused my son, but he abused me quite a bit. And so I finally filed a restraining order. And the next day after it was served upon him and he left the house, he filed for divorce. The run to the courthouse, from what I gathered it's called now, he asked for everything, including sole custody of my son. And he spent the next 2 years doing everything he could to make me look bad, including getting custody evaluators involved, guardian ad litems involved, co-parenting counselors involved. Everybody had their hands out too, and they all were frequent clients of my ex's attorney, so they all had a very close relationship. Nothing that I did, and I was a good mother too, nothing I did could ever be seen as good by the judge, because my ex would always be coming up with, well, this lie or that lie, this lie or that lie, and backed up by the paid and bought for court participants. As an example, the custody evaluator gave both of us the MMPI-2 test. It's a common psychological test that's given to court, family court participants. When I got the report, it said I scored high in scale 5, and scale 5 was very hostile, paranoid, delusional, all sorts of stuff like that. And I was like, what? Wait a second. And it sounded very, very violent and bad. And then it said my ex-husband was scale 6, scored high in scale 6. And scale 6 was very peaceable and loving and an enjoyable person. And I was like, how can this be? He was so paranoid and hostile all the time. I said, there's no way. So I spent days looking on the internet for information on this, and I ran across the assessment text by Dr. John Graham, who's one of the 4 authors of the MMPI. And I ran across his exact wording on this test. And the custody evaluator, although I did genuinely score highest in a scale 5, the actual assessment for a high score in a scale 5 is a female that traditionally follows more of a masculine interest and stuff, and rejects a traditional female role. And it was not a clinical scale, and which was very true for me because I'd been in the Army for 7.5 years. I was a motor sergeant. I'm an engineer. I've enjoyed muscle cars. That was me. I was like, yeah, where did he come up with all this stuff? And then I got down to scale 6, and he basically took from Dr. Graham's book, word for word, and gave me the scale 6 assessment and said it was scale 5, and actually it all fit my ex-husband's score that he scored highest in scale 6. So that's when I filed a complaint with the state attorney general and wanted to have something done about it. And once they found out, the custody evaluator, who had been a former chairman of the state psychology board and 30 years in the business, he wasn't like somebody fresh out of school and, wet behind the ears. He knew what he was doing. He told the state attorney general's office that, oops, Shannon's right, I did make a mistake. I don't know what I was thinking. She did make a mistake, but she's hostile anyway. So they sent a letter off to the judge. I didn't find out about it because he sent it to my attorney I had at the time. My attorney I had at the time said, well, why did you guys use Lawler? And I said, well, that's one that was given by the court. And he said, well, whenever I want a father to have custody, I go to this custody evaluator because he always picks the fathers. So the state attorney general's office dropped the case. I didn't know about it. My attorney stopped talking to me, even though I'd given him a retainer. He stopped talking to me. He stopped even working with me because I was about ready to destroy his go-to man whenever he had a father client wanted, and he wasn't going to go after the custody evaluator. So I had to get another attorney, and the current state psychology, the chairman of the state psychology board, helped me find another attorney, and he came to my hearing and told the judge about what happened. And also, Dr. John Graham also helped me get another psychologist to help fight this. And they wanted to use this, actually, as a national discussion and how these tests are misused in custody evaluations and how they can really make them crooked and nobody knows, what's going on. I was lucky that I found out and blew the whistle on it, but it didn't matter. My court judge and the commissioner that heard the case both had been punished by the state of Indiana for different things. The commissioner that heard the case had been punished by the state for holding ex parte communications, a hearing without both parents. He held a hearing without the mother and only with the father in the courtroom, and decided to send the deputy sheriff over to her house and pick up the son without even having a chance of being heard. So he was punished by the state, but it was basically a slap on the hand. The judge that signed off on my final decree that gave my ex sole custody almost killed a cop on Keystone Avenue. He was out drinking and he had a blood alcohol content level of 0.16 and crossed the center line and almost hit a cop head on and spent the night in jail. And then 2 weeks later, he signed off on my final decree giving my abusive ex-husband full custody of my son. So it's crazy that the state of Indiana allows people like this to remain on the bench and allows court participants to act on clients' behalf in a corrupt way and not be held accountable for their actions. by state code, they are not liable for anything that they do wrong. And something needs to be done about that. My name is Shannon Wilson. I'm from Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm a victim of family court corruption. Individuals that act on behalf of clients in family court proceedings can act at will as they want and not be held liable for their actions. I had a custody evaluator that decided to switch the results, the paranoid and hostile results that my ex-husband came up with on his testing. He gave me the results that he had, and he made up something nice for him. Although the custody evaluator admitted he made a mistake, but I was still hostile anyway, I lost full custody of my son. And he can't be held liable for it. I filed a complaint with the State Attorney General's office, and they dropped it. They need to hold people like that accountable. They also need to hold judges accountable for these bad decisions that they do. Both of my judge and my county commissioner had been punished by the state before, and they still sit on the bench. We don't need judges like that. In Marion County, Indianapolis, Indiana, the way you become a judge is you pay either the Democratic Party or the Republican Party for a judgeship. They're given a certain amount of judgeships. The parties decide how many are going to be Republican, how many are going to be Democrat. And if you want to be a judge, the last I heard, Democratic people had to pay $16,000 to be a judge, and Republican people had to pay $31,000 to be a judge. There's no way to get a bad judge off the bench, because they pay their way onto the bench to extend their own agenda, and that needs to change.